So let's begin, 6 p.m. Let's call the Brattleboro Planning Commission meeting of April 3rd to order. Let's start with some announcements. I will start with just one and say that we have a vacancy now. I'll remember to look at the camera so the public knows I'm speaking to them especially. We have a vacancy, and so please apply if you're interested. Prudence resigned. There we go, there's the announcement. And I think Sarah may have one, and about strong towns. Oh, but she disappeared. Oh, she's back.
I'm here.
Yeah, do you want to talk about the strong towns competition?
Moving location. Yeah, so Brattleboro is in the final four, which is wild.
Mm-hmm. Go us.
Yeah, sort of short time frame to submitting, and then here we are at the final four, which was really awesome. I think in the first round we, in the Sweet 16, we beat Duellen, New Jersey by like 700 votes, which was awesome. And then in this last one we beat Selma. They didn't give me numbers, but I think it was 46% to 54%. So I don't know, kind of nice to hear the numbers. And now we're up against Jackson, Tennessee, which I really like their submission. So I didn't vote for them, but a good contender, I think. So yeah, get the vote out. And then if we make it to the championship, Strong Towns is doing like a webcast, and they'll be interviewing Sue along with whoever else, if we make it that far.
So what is that final four, like they do with NCAA? What is the final?
It's modeled after that, yeah.
Ah.
Yeah, so we're in one competition right now, and then with another town, and then once that is decided, then it'll just be two competitors.
Now, how did that start? I mean, this was like a last minute thing, getting involved, and there was more other towns have this. Out of how many towns total, Sarah? Did you tell us?
I think Strong Town said there were 40 submissions,
Wow.
and they chose 16 of those.
That's amazing.
And then people vote from the 16 on. So, yeah,
That says a
Pretty
lot,
cool.
people, about Brattleboro.
yeah, sure does.
I mean,
It was interesting to me too that last week I was on a webinar and folks were talking about strong towns, so that was interesting to me that it's talked about, in the planning and development world more than I realized, so that was interesting. And I'll be curious to hear too if anybody has any other compelling reasons as we're working on getting out the vote, but one of my friends who asked why it was important, I shared that often, for better or worse, places that receive awards are more likely to be able to receive further support for initiatives, grants, funding, all sorts of things that are of interest. So that was a compelling argument to her. It was, her hometown. She wants people to know.
Yeah, I think that's a great reason, and I think we don't necessarily win anything other than the title, which is nice, and Strong Towns does a video of Brattleboro, so for promotion sake. But I think just getting our name out there in sort of the Strong Towns world is really beneficial. And actually, this round you'll see. We didn't have to submit anything for this round. They had Strong Town advocates comment on our town. So it's just interesting to sort of hear different perspectives about all the cool things we're doing, and maybe some suggestions on how to improve, or some challenges we might face. So I think it's just beneficial overall.
is this
get that
first time
perspective.
already? We've been doing this? Is this just the first time, Sarah?
First time.
Look at that.
I know. Let's
That's
go all
just-
the way, Gary.
Hey, you know what? We're gonna have a pizza party.
Well, get out the vote.
Yeah.
Now, how many times can you vote? Because I went on there a couple that kept coming back, cast your vote.
You can vote
Transparency.
once a week.
Once,
Yeah.
oh, so it is once.
Or once
But
per email.
One per email.
Ah, okay, so that would clear that up.
And they don't ask you to confirm your email address.
So we don't have to
either,
redact any votes or anything.
to verify it.
Exactly.
Which is a good thing, but thanks a lot, Seth, that's, I'm glad we're in that, you
Yeah,
picked
great
that
news.
out, yeah, this is like, wow, I mean, this for that, not just to know, but people see our town as a friendly town and a place to come
Sure
visit.
does.
Yeah,
Cool, thank you, thanks guys.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. I think there's a update on the walk bike plan presentation because of the snowstorm in March.
Yeah, so I've got two announcements, so that's one of them. That is going to be, there's going to be a presentation at the April 18th select board meeting, final presentation. So if you wanna tune in or come in person to hear about that. And then the other announcement is that we got one of the Better Connections grants that we had applied for. The amount that we applied for was about 90,000. I haven't gotten the grant paperwork, I'm assuming we got the whole thing. It would be looking at the Canal Street corridor, and kind of the enhanced funding is for stormwater planning around there. So, and in addition to the development and active transportation that we're trying to, and
Mhm.
addressing the safety of some of the intersections there. So
And
that's exciting.
And 90,000, I guess I missed or forgot, because all the other municipal plans that we've done and gotten
Yes.
grants for since I've been a commissioner have all been around 20 to 25,000.
That's right.
I
Yeah.
think maybe 40 for one of them, but
Yeah.
this is multiple.
And there's only 3 communities in
Oh, wow.
that got them. It was West Windsor, I can't remember what the other one was, in Brattleboro, so.
Well,
That's
excellent
exciting.
job applying.
it's-
so well, again, I didn't know if I see it on, I knew you mentioned about Wyndham Regional Commission, for the elections.
Oh, for the appointments?
Yes.
So that's actually going to the select board tomorrow night, and Ralph Mima has been the other representative, so myself and Ralph have been the representatives to the regional commission, and the select board will make appointments tomorrow.
So far, I just want to get just a quick, where we're at with Wyndham Regional Commission, how things are going. We haven't talked about that in a while, so I just want to get brief, so we can probably put that on another agenda to see what's going on with Wyndham Regional this year.
I think it sounds good.
I actually wrote a report that is in the packet for the select board tomorrow night, so I can send it around to you all. if
Tune
you'd
in.
like.
How about that? Is that all right?
I love it. I
Sounds
love
pretty
it.
good, Sue.
Yeah.
Before, when I was early on the planning commission, it was kind of my understanding that it had been Sue plus a planning commissioner for a long time. So now that, there's another, respected community member who's not on the planning commission, who's on the Wyndham Regional Commission, that's maybe breaking the habit or the trend that was there before.
Right.
Not that that's necessarily a bad
Tradition.
thing, but maybe in coming years, in advance of the reappointment time to the select board, we should talk about it in the planning commission and see if anyone wants to apply or, compete against someone if they want to be reappointed.
And I guess if they have any questions out there in BCTV land about what Wyndham Regional Commission does, is there anyone they can contact to get, or where they can go to get information about that particular organization?
Yeah, so wyndhamregional.org is their website, and I am one of the town of Brattleboro's reps, so you
There
can
you
reach
go.
out to me.
Get involved.
Okay, if there are no more announcements, we can move on to reviewing last meeting's minutes. It was March 6th. I'll entertain a motion, and then we'll discuss any changes or questions.
Motion that we approve March 6th, 2023.
A second.
I to abstain because I wasn't there.
Okay, we'll note that. But are there any issues or questions?
No discussion.
Hearing none. All those in favor, please raise your hand and keep it up.
Aye.
That's Sarah, myself, Gary, and Linda, and Todd abstained in advance.
Is that what I should abstain, just wait until he votes?
Yeah, I think that's
All right.
it's okay. I still have enough memory to be able to function with a reversed way of doing it. Okay, moving on, I think this is the third time we've seen a lot of this, but we haven't kept getting pushed off. Hopefully we can get through it. It's actually kind of, I think, a lighter agenda than usual, so I think we should be able to get through everything and not feel rushed and not be considering going late. So yeah, this is mostly, besides the the accessory structures exemption, which I brought forth and then staff has revised. Everything else, I think, is just being presented to us as suggestions from staff. So we have quite a list here: the accessory commercial units, changes to the neighborhood center uses, the mixed use district uses, and multifamily housing, single room occupancy. And then the zoning at Winston Prouty campus. From last meeting, there was a letter requesting a certain designation from the director of Winston Prouty, so we'll consider that too. But Sue, Steve, would you like to present and bring us through this list of proposed changes?
Do you want to start with the accessory commercial unit?
Sure. So as Tom mentioned, this is the third or so time that this has come up to the agenda, and we made very minor adjustments to the language since the time before last that this came up, but it's remained the same as it was when submitted from the prior month. So I'm not sure if everyone's had a chance to read through it and if there are any remaining comments or considerations, or if it's reached the point where there's consensus to take some sort of motion.
I just have a little one. I brought it up another time. It's not a crucial change, but I just think for clarity, Roman numeral lowercase 5 or V, where it says later in that paragraph that the above standards 3-foot encroachment. I just think if it said the standard 3-foot encroachment. You see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
So number 5, and then second line towards the end, the above standards 3-foot. Someone reading that would be like, well, which one? And they could use context clues to figure, well, it's either 3 or 4, but
Yes.
might as well just say, and standard 3's 3-foot encroachment.
You had raised
Yeah.
that. My apologies. We'll make sure that gets changed. That's right. Referring to number 3 rather than number 4, right?
Just so people don't think that it's referring to number 4.
Mhm.
I think it is speaking about number 3.
Right.
Or referring to it. So.
Mhm.
And then the portion on home businesses there's some recommended changes there. Was that in response to the conversation we were having about what really distinguishes the two at this point?
Mhm.
So it seems there were a couple things like the home business hours shifting that I was just curious about how that came about, because it's not directly related to the accessory structures. As far as I could tell, there wasn't anything about the accessory structures regulations that would change this element, so I was curious about what the hour change on home businesses was proposed.
I think generally from staff there was a sense that it wasn't best practice for us to get into specifying specific hours that ought to be
Based on noise ordinance sorts of things instead?
yeah,
Okay.
it was sort of in conflict with or not well correlated with how we were actually treating noise.
Sure.
So I think that's from an earlier.
Okay. And is the same thinking related to the shipping and deliveries? That we just don't have a way really to regulate that?
We don't really have a way to enforce
Okay.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a question about the home business too. Removing quite a few of the provisions there, almost, and I didn't really, unfortunately, consider this really deeply and thoroughly, but it almost seems to me like it makes home business and all the regs that correspond to home business almost makes it a looser category and more permissive than ACUs.
I think that was the intent, while being less noticeable, or for lack of a better word, or public facing at least. It was meant to not restrict for any unnecessary reason, sort of imperceptible or very low impact businesses that are sort of.
So where's the line of provisions that define it as less visible than ACUs?
So it.
I mean, there's no, like ACUs have a 500 square foot footprint restriction, but home business doesn't have any. So home business could be larger, for example.
It has a 40%
Oh,
of the floor area of the structures on the parcel. So that could certainly wind up being larger. But it is also limited in its ability to have outdoor display, lighting, signage, and the general scale of it in a way that needs to be much less oriented towards drawing in the public than the accessory commercial unit is. I think that was our understanding of how it would be best distinguished from home business. So if you were running some sort of business that caters to a public that is maybe even outside of Brattleboro, run entirely on the internet, and you hire 2 people who come to your home and you have an office in that home, we would be trying to dial back some of the seemingly unnecessary restrictions on that, whereas that wouldn't really be in keeping with what we considered for the ACU, unless that business was more directly oriented towards bringing the public in to a small neighborhood-oriented space, which is what the ACU allows for, but given that higher amount of potential impact, it has some slightly higher review.
There's a grammatical issue with number 8. It just says home business must conform, and then we took out the 2, but we need that 2 back so that they can conform to the performance standards in chapter 320.
Okay, yeah, that is captured in number 6 above, but I must have gotten a little bit overboard with crossing things out in the original text. Thank you.
well, and so one major change, which maybe, so there's the 2 sections here, the proposed new language and then the original text marked up. It caught me a little, I had a suspicion, and then I looked in our actual land use regs, and the original text doesn't say that the administrative officer reviews it. It says the DRB reviews it as conditional.
It's true.
Yeah. So that's another potential change, that it's changing home business from a DRB conditional review to just like a zoning administrator, probably much quicker and simpler and more permissive.
Right, that was certainly our intent.
Yeah. So that's yeah, okay.
And I noticed that the home occupation exemption, which it appears you've listed here for reference, has still some of the language that we've stricken from the others. Is there no intent at this point to change the home occupation exemption?
The home occupation exemption comes from state statute, so that's
Let's
pretty.
keep it.
Yeah.
We have heard from Brian that there's some wiggle room within what we have here, but I don't think we've done really any looking into that. We could if there was specifically interest, but otherwise I think it's supposed to just be meeting the statute, and I think we probably allow for anything that this doesn't capture through one of those other two.
I also gotta get rid of the 1 square foot sign that's like actually hanging a shingle. Maybe 2 shingles, but still.
For home occupation, I remember for a DRB meeting, it wasn't clear to me that, and then Brian clarified for me, it wasn't clear to me that home occupation is at least understood by staff or defined, but I'm missing the wording, that no customers in person are allowed with home occupation.
I believe so.
But I still don't, but I don't see that in the wording with home occupation.
This
unless
was
I'm-
just an excerpt from that, I believe.
Well, I looked in the land use regs
Oh,
too,
okay, sorry.
the whole.
Yeah, it may be that our existing land use regs aren't well tailored in their language of making that clear, but I can dig up the statute to
Mhm.
send out, because we might be interpreting it too narrowly. Mostly been deferring to other folks' descriptions of how that is supposed to generally work, at least in terms of our home occupation, the way, or home business rather, the way that we've written that insinuates that it is meant for anything that has outside traffic. So I think that's sort of how that works in practice, but it might not have to be that way, at least on our end. So we can look into that. But there are specific types of business that are considered exempt home occupations by state statute, like I believe childcare up to a particular number of children is. But a hairdresser was not, even if it was one chair, which is why that would come before the DRB soon.
So it sounds like the home occupation exemption is just a reference anyhow, so the 2 pieces that are put forward for our approval then are the accessory commercial unit language that we've reviewed a few times now, and the home business proposed new language. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yes.
Yeah, any other questions or suggestions about it?
I move that we approve the accessory commercial unit language as written with the modifications suggested in this meeting.
Second.
All those in favor, raise your hand, keep it up. That's all 5 of us, great.
And I then move that we approve the new proposed language for home business.
Oh, nice. Any final discussion? I forgot to ask that for ACUs. Any final discussion? No? Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
All 5 of us. Great. Moving on maybe to the neighborhood center use table changes, or something else, if you guys have a different plan, or different order.
Nope, neighborhood center is good. Bear with me, I went looking for reading glasses and I don't have any with me, so
You too,
gonna try.
We have a
Get the old
226D.
spyglass.
What's that?
We have a
Is that the one that's
226D.
referred to as hate memo in our pack?
Hey, that's the height memo, right, Tom?
No.
Those. Post miscellaneous.
Okay.
Proposed miscellaneous zoning amendment.
That one is, okay.
Hold that up.
So,
But it looks like the first page of the, it looks like the first page of the neighborhood center.
there's some extra copies if anybody wants them. So the proposed changes that we're suggesting here are to the building footprint size. It's currently 12,000 square foot max. We're proposing 20,000 square foot max. And then also there's some use changes. both in the permitted and the conditional uses. I'm suddenly feeling like we may have gone over some of this before. Did we
We
hit
did.
neighborhood center? I think we ended on mixed use, so we can just, I think you accepted all of
Well, there was a
these.
little, we had a little back and forth about the bar or drinking place.
Oh, yes, thank you.
In neighborhood center.
Yeah,
And it wasn't previously conditional, right? It just, or was it?
it was conditional
Oh,
and
oh, I
we're
see. Now
recommending
it's crossed out,
that
yeah.
it be permitted use. Which still, it still requires site plan review.
Mhm.
It, and so it still has to meet any nuisance standards, anything like that.
Mhm.
But these are kind of commercial areas where we're trying to have housing development as well. And it's just, based on conversations that we had had previously about the rural business area, it just seemed to make sense that these could be areas where bar or drinking place is a permitted use. They do abut some neighborhoods, particularly at exit 1, and there's definitely residential on Putney Road in these areas, as well as West Brattleboro. Which, if the zoning changes go through, will have a neighborhood center in the former rural business, so. But we think the nuisance standards and those kind of things will control for a bar or drinking place.
Mhm. If it's permitted, just refresh my memory again, then it doesn't go before the DRB, the site plan review is before the administrative officer?
No, site plan review could still
Oh, right.
be before the development review board. What the DRB would not be evaluating is how it affects the
The
character of the
character,
area.
okay. Just more like physical things?
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah, you'd be addressing kind of the site plan aspects of
yeah.
it, not how does it fit within the
Right.
neighborhood, which
Now,
is.
I remember
always-
Dan having hesitation or being opposed to this, but he's not here. And we're not making a final decision right now either, in a sense, we're gonna have the public hearings. And then the select board is actually the ones that make the final decision, but just wanted to mention him. I don't know that, maybe there were others.
My understanding is that the items that have been permitted in uses and have been allowed as permitted uses in the past that are now stricken through could potentially still be approved as a conditional use. The places that are already permitted in that way will be able to remain in that way unless a different use is proposed in the future, at which point they would change. Is that true? They'd be grandfathered in?
Yes, an existing use, yeah.
Okay.
For residential, I believe it's the case that there is no sort of shot clock, so to speak, on an abandonment of that use.
Right.
But for non-residential, you could end up being considered an abandoned use while having previously been an existing nonconformity.
Yeah.
But I believe that would only be in the case that we have stricken the use entirely from both parts of this table.
And I see that under permitted uses, we've stricken surface parking and parking structure garage, but those do not then appear as conditional uses. Does that mean they're no longer allowed in the district?
As a standalone use, I think that was our
Mhm.
judgment was that we wouldn't like to see that as a built form compared to other potential uses that may well either choose to or be required to provide on-street or off-street parking in conjunction with that use. I could see the justification for parking structure
Yeah.
under conditional though.
Yeah, I would say it'd be good to have at least one of them as a conditional use, because if these areas do develop in a more walkable way, people may need a place to park in order to then explore the area on foot or bicycle or whatever else it might be.
Yeah, allowing for a multi-story parking structure, right, could actually end up leading to less surface parking overall, so, yeah.
So I'd like to see parking structure or garage as a conditional use in these areas.
I agree with that. How should we, not that necessarily that we're ready, but how should we vote on all of these, one section at a time?
Yeah, I mean, that'd be a way to do it.
I think you could do it by, you know, the proposed changes to the neighborhood. You could do it by the district.
Oh, that's what I mean, instead of
Yeah.
like this whole document.
Yes.
Yeah, that'd be too much.
So you can't inclusive, like, go down each one and say, each, you know, vote on that, you don't have to say, all in favor, you just say the whole thing.
Yeah, the proposed amendments to the neighborhood center
Right.
with,
Yeah,
you know.
but in the rest of this section, you know, this document, there's the mixed-use district, there's multifamily, there's SROs, I don't wanna do all of that.
Right.
And
Yeah.
it's one
One
vote.
doesn't company,
Yeah.
right? Collaborate more together.
So are there any more thoughts or opposing views or anything to the neighborhood center? 2 pages in the suggestions that were made?
Oh, these are for audience or public?
No?
No, there's no problem.
Okay, I motion to approve the suggested changes on these 2 pages to the neighborhood center district, but with the suggestion to put parking structure or garaging conditional.
Second. You get that.
Todd gets it, okay.
You gotta pass them around, y'all.
Yeah,
Yes, share the wealth.
okay, all in favor? Unless
Aye.
there's no more discussion, I'll give that a chance, yell it out if you do. Nope, all 5 of us have our hands up, great. Moving on to mixed use district.
Okay, so the mixed-use district has some proposed amendments to the purpose statement. And so the change to this is really to get at smaller scale, walkable, and having a change in this district. So, for example, on Canal Street, in the area of Bird Street and Washington Street, that's part of the mixed-use zoning district, and there are a lot of auto-dominated uses there. There's used car sales, there's car wash, there is gas stations, and a former gas, like one existing, one former. And so auto-centric uses are really not what we're going for there. We want it to be more walkable. And there's other mixed-use areas in town, it's not the only one. But we didn't feel like the purpose statement was really capturing what we were hoping to see there with the kind of mixed-use buildings of retail or commercial office space on the first floor and residential on the second floor. So that's what the change to the purpose statement is about. And then also we wanted to allow a larger building footprint of 9,000 square feet from the 6. So the existing zoning we found was really kind of preserving the existing character, maybe giving a little bit room for growth, but not a lot. And so a 6,000 square foot building is not necessarily going to get us the housing that we need. It's pretty small, so bumping it up and kind of allowing these areas to change a little bit over time to hopefully meet some of our other housing goals. And then on the use side, there is one of the permitted uses is a shop or store, no drive-through, up to 3,000 square feet. And we didn't really feel like there needed to be a limit on the prohibiting larger retail. 9,000 square feet is not very big, so if there was a 9,000 square foot store there, it's it's smaller than the Walgreens on Canal Street. It's still a small scale residential commercial use. And then to go in line with what we had indicated for in the purpose statement, getting rid of automobile repair and service, rental or leasing outdoor storage, because those tend to be auto uses as well. And then, let's see, getting rid of size limitations on restaurants or bar or drinking places.
Did we intend to leave the size limitation on light industrial, laboratory, and computer data center?
I think we did,
Okay.
but I'm not sure we gave it much
Question. Yeah.
thought. So we can talk about that. I cannot read the footnote. Can you read that?
Limited to parking that serves residential properties in the immediate neighborhood, parking structures must not be more than 1 story in height.
Okay, so this is about allowing surface parking and parking structure, kind of like what we've discussed in the residential areas where you could have these, in this area to kind of facilitate less parking at an individual, like the parking could serve multiple properties, so. So those are the changes.
Now, would some of that language be beneficial to have put into neighborhood center?
In terms of limiting the parking structures?
Well, no, because we were talking about multi-story parking structures being beneficial for commerce
Right.
and stuff, but maybe for the surface parking? Or is it kind of viewed that neighborhood center is more valuable as like a dense commercial thing, and so we don't necessarily want to promote surface parking as much? But in the mixed use, which is a little bit of that and a little bit of residential, then it's, well, not really completing my thought there, but maybe it's clear
I'm just
enough.
trying to think about it.
It's okay.
Thanks.
I think we did view
No.
kind of the neighborhood center as a little bit more valuable towards commercial, and therefore we didn't want to see it given over to surface parking.
Mhm.
But,
But sometimes for residential, it just needs to happen to make the residential viable.
yeah.
I don't have a map in front of me, could somebody remind me, mixed use neighborhood, noting here the urban center, service center, neighborhood center, could somebody give me an example of the sort of areas we're talking about here, this downtown and,
There's little pockets all over.
Yeah.
Steve's gonna call it out pretty
So
quick
neighborhood centers are around the exit 1 area,
Mhm.
probably to the hospital,
Right.
like along Canal Street. There is one from, if you go up Putney Road, from the Veterans Bridge to kind of the Staples Plaza.
Mhm.
And then the other neighborhood center would be out in West Brattleboro near the Chelsea Royal and,
Okay, so those are our neighborhood centers, and the last section applied to those.
yeah.
So where it says mixed-use neighborhood district encompasses land around urban center, service center, neighborhood center, it's the area surrounding the neighborhood centers?
So it is, there's, so
This is kind of burnt orange, or, well, less burnt orange.
can you zoom in a little bit on it? So it's areas of like Bird Street, parts of Flat and Frost Street, Canal Street after you get out of downtown and go a little bit south,
Okay.
up by the Commons.
Okay, so mixed use, seeing that here. Yep, okay. And then,
Just trying to highlight those.
That's
are
William Street.
A few
Uh,
enclaves.
Brandy Saxton wrote something in a memo a couple months ago. What did she say? It's like mixed use is kind of an odd district compared to the others, because it in some ways just lumps together some disparate areas because they don't really seem to fit too well into the other things.
They were, that's how they
At least originally, that's how it
That's how
was.
they came about. There
Yeah.
was some office uses, there was some residential, there was some commercial, but they were all smaller scale.
Yeah.
House conversions, if you think of what you see on Canal Street, like some of the electrical, is it Brian Tyler, I think, has a shop there, kind of the TV repair place,
Yeah.
Brown Computer Solutions, like that kind of scale.
I mean, if it wasn't the way it is and things, already built and occupied and used the way they are, I would kind of view mixed use as like in between urban center and residential neighborhood,
Yeah,
right? It allows
It is.
something in the middle, yeah.
yep,
So it'd be, and in some sense, it is kind of or what do you guys use the term transect, right? Or a gradation
Yep.
from more upzoned to downzoned, somewhere in the middle.
yep.
Except it doesn't allow for the large sizes, like the service center or neighborhood center will do.
Correct.
So there's different ways, different gradients to think about, not just a single one.
So I just want to, I guess, a quick question. I don't know if you got the email I sent you guys about them overhauling the Act 250. I sent you an email about that and how they passed the bill. I'm trying to find the bill that they just recently passed.
It just passed the House, the Senate, it's going on to the House now.
Oh, S100?
Yes. And they were doing something like an overhaul, V-Tran or whatever this kind of BT funds for a, what is it, a Better Connections grant program, I don't know if you heard about that.
Yeah.
And they're overhauling towns livable and walkable. So I didn't know if that's something in that purview that would be connected with.
So we just got the Better Connections grant. We got one. They're providing more funding, I think, in the bill to continue that program.
Maybe later in the agenda, under looking.
It's a little tangent
Yeah,
to this conversation.
later in the agenda, under looking ahead and what we're gonna start working on in some months, maybe, you know, updates to state statute are gonna be things that maybe we'll think, oh geez, maybe we should have waited a little bit with our,
Yeah.
Or
but anyway,
try.
we can plan how to, you know, incorporate or not to the extent we have to.
So one of the-
Which we have to, because state statute changing and we're beholden to it, but.
I don't think anything that they're preempting or likely to preempt will actually do much
Oh, okay.
to change what we're
Yeah.
doing.
Yeah, there's one area in height that I'll bring up when we talk about
Okay.
building height.
So right now, those two I mentioned,
It's
is
not
not
passed
in
yet.
Maine right now, but that's down the road.
Yeah.
With more grants.
So as I'm looking at the dimensional standards here in mixed use, it looks like most of this is becoming more permissive in terms of being able to build on a smaller lot and that lot having less frontage and so forth. But I'm curious about the frontage of build out. On the one hand, making it only 40%, oh, it's a 40% minimum, not max. Okay, never mind. Got it.
Any other questions, whether you can answer them yourself through saying them or need others to answer them? Anything else with mixed use? Did we suggest any changes or we just asked questions? Oh, no.
I think the only thing was there was a question about whether we want to strike the maximum size of light industrial laboratory and
Oh.
computer
Yeah.
data center.
Yeah.
And that makes sense to me that we wouldn't necessarily limit it, since those are conditional uses anyway and they'll be reviewed.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I don't see it.
No, I was just looking at that one, it was, how do you do this one? 303C.
This one here.
Oh, okay.
Under mixed use.
Mm-hmm.
You are.
All right.
I'm looking forward to those comments when we get there.
The multifamily housing, is that part of this as well?
Yeah, but let's
No,
stick
that's a
with
separate one.
It is separate, okay,
Ah.
great.
No.
We can wait then.
There we go.
Just
Well,
make
it's
sure
a-
we're getting it all around here, you know?
Yeah.
All right.
So if we're striking the 3,000 square foot maximum for light industrial laboratory and computer data center, let's incorporate that, which is what I'm doing, into a motion to approve the changes to the mixed-use neighborhood use table as proposed.
What about,
Those-
sorry, Tom, I didn't mean to interrupt, but
Yeah.
what about the purpose statement? Do you want to
Oh.
just do it in general for the
Oh, sure,
mixed use
sure.
district?
And that too, yeah, and the change to the purpose statement and to the footprint maximum increase.
Second.
That's my sloppy motion. Linda seconds it.
Second your sloppy motion, Tom?
Thank you. Any further discussion, or last discussion about that before we vote? Is everyone clear? All in favor, raise your hand please, if you're in favor. That's all five of us, great. Okay, moving on to what a couple of us had already been ready for. The the multifamily housing, section 303D, proposals to change some of those provisions.
So we're just looking to reduce some of the barriers, some of the costs that might be associated with creating multifamily housing, and then maybe even some of the assumptions about how we think people should, what they need, which can in turn end up increasing the cost. So that would be particularly related to the open space, the private open space and the regular open space. So yeah, I can go through each of them, or if you've read the materials and you just want to jump in, we can do that.
Well, I've read it, and I just have a question or concern, but I don't know if other people want it walked through.
No, I feel good about it.
I have additional questions, so let's see what you're like.
Okay, I do worry a bit with removing the for the private space and the open space, removing the actual tangible or defined, quantities, the measurements. Because without those, I mean, what's the bare minimum for a yard? What's the bare minimum for, a terrace or courtyard or balcony? I mean, these things could be, a developer could create something that's just the stuff of, comedy or absurdity. And I think I also wrote a note, I'm having trouble finding it now, but it seems like, if we strike some of these things, just like the required front setback, that whether that's 10 or 15 feet deep from the road could just be considered the front yard, and that doesn't really seem like a decent, or the common open space, that doesn't really seem like a very decent or enjoyable open space. So
For clarity,
Yeah.
there's nothing to preclude you from doing that at the moment.
already, okay.
It would obviously require, under the current language, more area than would be in the minimum front setback or side or rear in every not rural business district, which has at least one setback that's 40 feet. But you could use quite a bit of your setbacks and even, I think, double dip and put it in the corner of your lot. And there's not really anything to say much about the quality or
The front
programming.
setback. Yeah, I don't know why I wrote that note then. I mean,
I-
the second part of it, but the first part, with just striking all the numbers and quantities, that seems a little too much. to
I
me.
think if you separate it out, I mean, I think common open space, I think it's okay to give, 400 square feet. I don't think that that's asking for too much.
Yeah,
It's the private open space, I think, that is particularly
yeah, I don't see,
cost adding here.
yeah,
Um,
yeah, I would agree with that. I think some common open space should be retained and it should be defined.
We used 400 actually as the minimum square footage for something that was similarly related, so I kind of like the idea of retaining the minimum of 400, but removing the requirement that it be concentrated, that it needs to be 30 feet long in any dimension. It might be that it's kind of scattered throughout, that open spaces aren't necessarily like the courtyard in the middle, but that there are open spaces around, but I like the idea of it being 400 square feet. That seems nice.
For clarity, the 400 is in effect, I believe, 1,600 or 2,000, given where the cutoff for multifamily housing comes in. Because as written, it's a per unit allocation, so that at the, I think we start calling them multifamily in the use tables at 5 units. I'm not sure if we would consider triplex and quadplex when we bring this in, but if it's the former definition, then it would be requiring 2,000 square feet, because it's 400 per unit.
Well, we could, I mean, I had
We've
struck both.
proposed to remove.
So-
I just
so
want to
we
make
could
sure
do-
we're.
Or, it could be 500 square feet per the developer or something like that.
So it's been stricken in this particular, but as has the 400 square feet in general. So I just wanted to make sure we got a clear reading on what we wanted to see put back in. Whether it be 400 square feet in general, or if it was the per unit allocation as we're currently doing it.
I don't see the per unit allocation. Am I missing something? Where is that?
It should be.
It's in two, under 2 common space. So there's 2 strikeout areas. There's a minimum of 400 square feet, and then on the very first part of the third
Oh,
line.
I see. Per dwelling
Per
unit.
dwelling.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, that was the major barrier.
Right.
400 square feet in general isn't nearly
see.
the same
Yeah,
level
I
of.
see, right.
And so I was proposing to strike the specificity and then kind of replace it with C, well, kind of up top saying, private units need to have access to private or semi-private outdoor living space. And then saying you need to provide common open space on there, but what that looks like or.
So if we then had number 2, common open space read, the development must provide a minimum of 400 square feet of common open space usable for community gardens and or passive outdoor recreation in accordance with the following, and then continue on as written.
Yeah, that.
When I say if, I mean I suggest.
Okay.
I like that.
Okay.
But underneath the 400 square foot strikeout, there's the
Right.
wording, the words "or planned," so that's to be passive or planned outdoor recreation?
Yeah, so if you wanted to do a playground, if you wanted to do a barbecue pit, that would, a
That's
picnic
fine.
area, that would be okay.
Okay.
It wouldn't have to just be passive, you could meet it by providing some sort of amenity.
Activity, amenity, okay.
Do we have any concern people would interpret planned as maybe I'll make some open space someday?
Yeah, that's actually what I thought.
Okay.
Or I thought it was maybe like.
Maybe
a lot
program.
of-
Programmed? Yeah.
Yeah, or like an area is not accessible except for when there's a planned function.
And could I ask for clarification regarding, I guess, 1C, how it's been rewritten for private or semi-private, and then below we have common. Are we meaning common as in open to the public, as like a quasi-park sort of
says-
exaction?
It says it must be accessible to all residents of the development. So my reading of that is that it's not common as in public, but it's
Yeah.
common as in residents.
Yep.
So then are we meaning to interpret the above then, that every unit have one of those things specific to it under 1C? Or is that meant to be sort of another flexible workaround where if there are some of those, that they be generally accessible to residents?
Maybe there's
Yeah.
an exception or, an allowance that if the common space is bigger, people don't necessarily need their own private outdoor space.
Right.
Oh yeah, could that be some sort of a or B type thing? That bad choice of
Mhm.
Y or Z.
Yeah.
Wait, I thought we were talking about C.
Right, where you provide those small private spaces, or you provide an outdoor space that's common,
Mhm.
not to
Right.
pick into this at the 11th hour.
Because again, this applies for units, for buildings that would have more than 5 units, but I can imagine some of our big beautiful homes could accommodate 5 or 6 units, but might have a hard time accommodating
This,
a porch for that many units.
right.
So if there was an outdoor common space that they had access to, maybe it's not as important that they have a 6-foot deck in addition.
Mhm. I think we can write something that's the do either of these things
Mhm.
to
Yeah.
meet the.
Yeah.
We might be able to also put in a piece of language that just doesn't require it of historic district structures, just to be
Mhm.
safe. Although I suppose with the option of the other,
Mhm.
that it's sort of moot.
And I do appreciate the requirement being waived if they're within walking distance of a public park. I mean, that certainly helps too. A lot of those homes are located in areas.
Yeah, it helps a lot in our kind of developed neighborhoods.
Okay, so that's one you're gonna bring back.
Yeah,
Yeah, you'll see it in a planner.
Thank you.
I like that result of that brainstorm for the, one or the other. That makes sense to me.
A question that might be out of context, so looking up, it is at the very end of 303E on that page, the very last paragraph, where it talks about.
Well, so we're moving on to single room occupancy now?
Yeah,
Oh, did I jump ahead to that?
you did, and
apologize.
I don't want us to look at that one, I want us to look at a different one.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Then please steer me, thank you.
Take this page.
Should we
Sorry.
vote on that? Well, no, you guys are gonna revise it and come back to us,
Yeah.
the multi-family housing. Okay. What's the next section? If we're
Okay. So the next one, can you pull up this SRO? I'm sorry, I was moving things from past meetings and I didn't strike that out. I have a different single room occupancy facility that I want you to look at, and it was in the, and rooming and boarding house.
Oh, we're gonna move to that now? Okay. Yeah, it's a separate
Yeah, we'll
document.
just jump over this SRO one and then we'll go back to the
Oh, so
document.
not this one?
Unless you would prefer to
No.
not. We're at the end of it anyway.
Not that one.
Oh, is it this one?
They've come up with something later and greater for it.
It's
Ah.
towards the back of that written.
2.0.
Do you have it, Todd?
If you look
Actually,
at,
3.0.
so not
It's
this,
303.
I mean, it
Got
is single room
copy of it right
occupancy,
there.
but
Yeah.
Oh,
Susan,
Okay. It's this.
yeah, I suspect that I had gotten all of them out. Awesome, thank you, man.
Do you see it?
Yeah, I got it, thank you.
Let's go to.
So this one we don't.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
You don't need that either.
Oh, it's that. I think the Winston County. Ah, thank you.
Okay. So we've talked a little bit about SROs at the last meeting. And rooming houses and what is the difference between them, because we were lacking a definition of SRO. And so I had kind of wanted to simplify it. Our definition of a rooming house is kind of dated and based on the model of you would go stay at somebody's house, they might provide you meals. And so I think that's kind of an older definition of a rooming house, from previous centuries maybe.
But did you change the definition of rooming house?
I did not,
Oh, okay.
because I'm trying to keep it simple.
Oh.
But what I did do is provide a definition of single room occupancies in 303E, which is up top. So a single room occupancy facility is any building containing rooms rented as living quarters. The living quarter may have a private bathroom in addition to the occupied room. Single room occupancy housing units may share a kitchen with one or more single room occupancy units in the same building and may also share a bathroom. And then it kind of goes on. It doesn't have to meet density standards, which we've kind of done away with anyway. Let's see, it must have a resident manager, but it can be waived if there are less than 10 rooms. That's how we have it currently. This is another location where it has 400 accessible to 400 square feet of common outdoor open space accessible to all residents. Suggested getting rid of the minimum number of washing machines and drying, washing and, go either way with that. It's a difficult one for us to enforce. It's a nice amenity to have. Is it a necessity? I think, is debatable. And the same with the requirement to have a utility sink that everybody can access. I think they're nice amenities, but they're getting a little bit into building code, which I think we're unlikely to enforce. I did keep the bicycle storage because that seems to be a priority in the community. Parking, I've clarified that it's one parking space for every 2 units. Based on our conversation, and I know Dan kind of wanted to get into the SROs and his experience, I did keep the requirement for a full kitchen and bumped it up to 1 per 8 units, unless there is something that is like a community kitchen that can serve all the units. And I'm thinking of like Holden Home in that situation where that has kind of converted into congregate living, a different form of congregate living, and they've got a big kitchen because it had been a commercial kitchen. Same with bathrooms. If they don't have a private bath, then 1 full bathroom for every 4 units. Kept that actually the same, but it doesn't have to be on the same floor. There is a size here that I kept that we could discuss, so it has to be at least 200 square feet and not more than 500 square feet. 200 square feet sounds kind of big to me for a room. So you might have recommendations on something more appropriate. Not occupied by more than two units, and it's the primary residence of the tenant. And then I did keep the rooming and boarding house. I made a change so that it could be not have more than 12 rooms, and that making it clear that it's a reduced parking, because right now it's like the parking is excessive on the rooming and boarding house because it's treating it as a lodging use, and so that one's still weird to me, but for simplicity's sake, it was more about fixing up the single room occupancy and then dealing with a couple of things on the rooming and boarding house.
So I guess the question I have.
Can I call in Sarah?
Yeah,
Okay.
Sarah, yeah, let's hear from her.
Let's hear from Sarah.
Yeah, I guess I'm just curious, in 1B under rooming or boarding house, you specified 2 adults, but in the SRO, you specified 2 people. Is that, is it supposed to be that specific? 2 adults or?
Yeah, good question. I think people's fine. I don't
guess
see
my
why it has
question,
to
like,
be.
are kids not allowed in boarding houses?
Or an unlimited amount of kids allowed.
Yeah, right.
I actually wrote that down in our last meeting.
Yeah, just clarification.
Think about that, huh? I don't know the answer to that, Sarah, actually. Probably something to think about. I mean, the unlimited kids in a small room, I don't know.
Is there any state statute about renting to minors or something like that? I know that's not the only,
I do not know.
option that we're considering. It could be an adult on the lease with the minor.
I think there is a fairly expansive definition of family or a group of related individuals, or, well, not even blood related, but yeah, household, thank you, that we might want to make sure we're not violating with either of those 2 options, or 2 people or 2 adults. I would assume 2 people probably doesn't violate any fair housing at the state level, but 2 adults might.
Okay.
I would suggest that we not strike D. I think it does make sense to provide washing and drying. I think it's more than just an amenity, especially if people using these units are less likely to have cars. I've schlepped my laundry around by bike and foot a lot, and I think it's really important actually that we ask that washing and drying machines be provided. I don't think we necessarily need to say how many, but I think it's good that they're on the premises.
Yeah, I was gonna concur with what was said about the washing machine. A lot of them now have that, but I guess my big question is about ADA accessibility. And 2, anybody can jump in. The word transient occupancy, can somebody define that a little bit more in this particular statement? Is prohibited?
Well, it's defined as tenancy for less than 30
Yeah.
days.
Yeah.
That's the sentence right after it is kind of,
So
it
anything
could be a
less
little
than-
clearer, but it's just saying, the rentals need to be for more than 30 days.
It can't be a short-term
So it's not,
rental.
it
So
can't
they
be like
can't
an
be
inn
okay,
or a
so-
motel
It's
or
not
hotel.
Airbnb.
So I don't know if you could specify that for people.
It could say transient occupancy is prohibited, which is the minimum rental or
Or say
tenancy period
short-term
of less
rental.
than 30 days.
Rather than transient, we could say short-term period rather than the word transient.
Well, we could just get rid of that sentence
Yeah.
and just say the minimum rental or tenancy.
Oh, yeah.
Let's not be
Yeah.
less
I
than
think that
30
can
days.
be stricken.
Yeah.
There we go.
Any thoughts on Linda's comment about or just section D in general about the washer and dryer? Sound like Gary concurred.
Yeah.
I'll volunteer as a member of the public. I'll put that hat on for a second.
Okay.
My current apartment would not meet if we had it by every 12 units, it wouldn't meet that standard. But it does manage to be one of the cheaper livable units in town. So I don't know how much those things correlate, but it is sort of, I had also lived in prior buildings in other parts of the world, country that didn't have any such facilities, and those were also affordable to me. So I don't know.
Yeah.
It might be.
So what if we just struck the for every 12 units piece? That there be laundry, but there'll be laundry on the property.
Yeah. I mean, I certainly like having it on the property. Just food for thought.
My question would be is that is making it mutually accessible is what's tough, because I absolutely concur with it being really a really important thing at both sides of that equation. However, really small rental units, just 2 or 3 rental units, often with people who want very private situations. I think the cost for small owners, giant corporate entities buying huge complexes, I don't think there's no question. But that's my
We're also not specifying that it be commercial units, right? So if most SROs, I don't actually know what the number is, but my guess is most SROs are gonna be more than a handful of bedrooms.
Well, I don't know about that. Is that true?
We don't actually have very many SROs.
Okay.
Only I agree with you because it's a convenience for a lot of people who can't get out and can't get, like you were saying, bus or whatever, disabilities or whatever, limitations. Where I'm at, I have one in my building, it's commercial downstairs, but upstairs we have 4 apartments, rooms. So I was just trying to see what type of requirement, because if you go by where Gottby Church is at, I don't know if you've ever been in there, but that's housing and they have it set up in there. So I was like, why is there a limitation for specifics on but if the dwelling place can't hold washer, dryer, why are we limiting what can go in? Because what if a person has a huge studio and they convert that into a bedroom and they have the accessibility to put a washer and dryer in it?
Right, there's nothing prohibiting each individual unit from having it. I think here we're really trying to define how many would be the minimum to have on the property. And I would say if we just strike the for every 12 units and keep the rest of that sentence.
Yeah.
The facility must provide 1 washing machine and 1 drying machine.
If,
That's my amended proposal.
if it's adequate to fit into that, because each unit's of different sizes and stuff, so I would just say,
Well, they most likely wouldn't be in the units, they'd be
There'd be
in a
one.
separate
some
room.
common
It'll be
space, some
Yeah.
separate room or closet or
Well,
hallway or
Right, or even in the,
basement.
by the sake of, I've seen little portables set up and stuff, so like I said, I don't want to limit people's creativity.
I don't think it does.
Yeah.
It's just, yeah, it's a tough one for me too, because, it is tempting, not that this is the only reason or what people are saying, but it's tempting to, want housing that provides all the amenities for everyone and every possibility, but like, I've definitely been in the situation in the past where I just wanted the cheapest place I could find, because I felt like my needs were minimum and I didn't want to pay for extra. And I was thrifty.
Did you always have a car?
I did then, yeah. But then, then I also think, well, some people do laundry every day. Sometimes, I'm a little better nowadays, but I used to only do it once every 2 weeks or once every month, The secret is don't go to bed without showering first. And there's other tricks too.
Well, I'm thinking of
But-
families too as well.
But, for someone like that, my younger self, like, I would gladly pay less for not having a washer and dryer, especially if I'm, young and visiting my mom once every couple months.
Oh, she's visiting.
But I'm
you
not
if she
sure how
wants to.
much putting in a coin-operated
So,
washer or dryer is necessarily gonna, I mean, I think if you think of it from the equity side of it, I don't think it's too much to ask the developer,
yeah,
I
the
think
person
we're
opening the
looking-
SRO to have one.
right.
I'm looking more at accessibility is what we have currently. In some towns, they don't have that many places to do laundry or 24-hour laundromats and,
We
looking
actually
at-
don't have very many laundromats in town.
There's none.
And when you
So-
think about where they are,
Yeah,
Yeah,
so that,
You're not gonna
considering
be easy
that,
to
I'm
get to.
factoring that into, a lot, and I see a lot of people that have those chairs. I didn't have a car, I'd have to throw it in my carrier with my daughter and carry her. So I mean, just thinking of, basically you're dealing with these struggles. That could be a blessing for some, in a sense, to have that, in that, and it helped out a lot.
yeah. I'm not pushing hard for, striking it like it is strike stricken, so I could go either way personally. I mean, 1 per 12 is pretty minimal too, if you think of it in one way, or, I don't know.
I mean, if they convert a house or a building or whatever into a place that can house people, and they determine that because they're gonna have to come in, the workers to see if you could do some type of hookup and stuff. I had it down there in Napa, we were contemplating putting one down there in Napa and setting that up for like a studio for someone, and we have a sink and all that, and it's stupid, but it's just that, you have to make sure things are accessible for people nowadays, because like, I was saying before, you don't have that luxury to go to one place, like you have to either go to West B or up on there, so there's no more.
Well, so Linda suggested striking for every 12 units, but I don't know, is that what you want to see, or is that you feel a compromise? Or
No, I'm okay with that.
that's what you want to see?
I would like for there to be washing and drying on the property, and I think that accomplishes that.
Okay. So we'll hold that thought unless anyone's aching to, or needs to make a suggestion to change that, but there's, plenty of other things to consider in the section. And I'd like to ask a question of staff to help me. I know we've talked about this before, and you prefaced this, the difference between SRO and rooming house. But with the definition that's there, it seems like a rooming house could be mistaken as an SRO sometimes, or it's kind of like a square is a rectangle, but a rectangle is not a square. It seems to me like SRO is the rectangle, and rooming house is a square. It's a more specific thing, and so that's the way
I see it.
Yeah.
I think that we'd see more SROs come in. I think we'd see more of them come in as SROs than a rooming house.
In Brian's response to our asking about why there are two, he had said that it's more of a sort of antiquated land use type, perhaps, or maybe not antiquated, but just was more common in past arrangements, and it's likely that we have both, even though they might not be particularly distinct in reality, because of the LCPS definitions that we use. So we might want to look into alternatives to that, or ways that we can edit that without jeopardizing the integrity of our definitions as a future project.
But at least like culturally, how those two terms have been used, at least from what I've seen and looking, on the internet at the Wikipedia and photos, like a rooming house typically from the outside looks like a single family house,
Yeah.
and an SRO looks like a hotel.
Right.
So, there's very different, built forms, and there's very different vibes associated with living in each, I would say.
Yep.
One feels like you're in someone's home and you're renting a room in it. The other feels like you have a thrifty apartment,
Yep.
a bare bones apartment. So
I think that's the key difference between the definitions now, is that the rooming or boarding house is still in a single family.
yeah, and it says that,
Yeah.
but it doesn't say anything for the SRO being
No.
like, a hotel-looking building or anything. And it doesn't
No.
need to, because since rooming house is defined, as okay. Just want to make sure we're on the same
So I guess
page. Good.
the last, I don't know if this is germane,
We'll see.
ADA accessibilities or anything in there that we need to?
I mean, they're considered commercial, so they're
Okay.
gonna have to be.
Oh, okay.
The SRO is, but the rooming house.
Okay.
No, rooming houses under state would as well.
Oh, once it
They
gets.
they could, yeah, they could.
So letter H, it looks like we've bumped up the number of rooms that a kitchen can serve. I kind of like the idea of there being a kitchen on every floor, since cooking is one of those like up and down things. Like laundry, you do it once in a while, but cooking, you do it, usually at least once a day. So it seems like it would be nice to have one per floor. I can also see how that would be much more likely to restrict what could actually be built, than having to have a kitchen on every floor is gonna be a lot more expensive. So I wanted to call attention to that, but I'm actually okay with it as is.
Okay.
For the sake of getting more affordable units.
Well, that's another thing, and just like the bathroom, whether or not a bathroom's on a floor or not, I think of a rooming house, a single family house having 2 floors, the top floor is all bedrooms. It's not unusual or unexpected to walk down a flight of stairs to go to the bathroom or the kitchen.
Mhm.
But if you have an SRO building that has 4 stories of 15 rooms on each floor, imagine being on the 4th floor and having to walk down to the 1st to cook or use the bathroom. So in reality, how much, you know, are we, if we strike these things, you know, how many new just like unpleasant places to live will pop up? I don't know, but like in some of those, that extreme example I just posited, that seems like we would want to prevent that in my mind.
Well, I mean, I would say maybe 2, one downstairs and one like in the middle, because I don't know regulations why with, you know, fire department, you know, all that stuff, how that works with each floor. More than likely, I guess the real way of looking at that would be one downstairs, like on the main floor, and then maybe one on the second, and they can, you know, share that.
I don't, yeah, it's tough to define, because we could spell things out for a 4-story SRO, but then what if there's a 3-story, or a 5-story, or 1-story? Like, how do we
Yeah.
write things simply?
What if we?
And what if an SRO only has 3 rooms in it? And it's
That's a good
3
question.
stories, what if it's this tall skinny thing, are we gonna crack it down? So,
What if
Bring the
we
food up
said
to the room.
that they need to have access to a kitchen on that floor or within one floor?
See, that goes back to your question, you know, how do you know how the dwelling place is set up?
well, that builds in.
It builds it in, but it doesn't define.
I think, so, you know, things could change, but we're not seeing SROs built. We see efficiency apartments, like we generally see, we'll see
Yeah.
efficiency apartments.
Sure.
We're not seeing this common shared kitchen. I think our most recent example is something like Holton Home. So 3 stories, 1 kitchen, probably on the 1st floor, I don't know for sure. So we're seeing, if anything, I think we'll see conversions, so that's why having 1 on every floor then makes it difficult to meet that standard. Hence the language to kind of allow it to be waived. I think getting too specific on where, I think your point is well taken,
Mhm.
you know.
Mhm.
You know, if it's a large facility with a lot of rooms, then yeah.
Well, a lot of
Getting
times the
kitchen would be
kitchen is
tough.
defined as a sharing community kitchen in the building or in the house or wherever. And everyone gathers into that one place, being like, say, Morningside or any of the other places, not, you know, it's like you said, one level home versus, so the place is usually outfitted for everyone, you know, to use, just like at the one over by where the Agape Church is at, that's an SRO as well. So everyone has a sharing community kitchen, they all have their own fridge, so, that, I guess we could revisit that. I'd like to get some more info on how that works, like you were saying, since it's a 4-story building, maybe it's a house that's, or even a farm, people can convert, you know, whatever. So that's a good question too.
We could try to, just like we can waive it, we could also try to have language, you know, multi-story SROs are encouraged to have a kitchen per floor, or
Sure.
new construction, yeah. You know, I mean,
Yeah,
the idea behind SROs is for it to be affordable, or at least historically
Right.
it has been. And it
if we look
could be
at
coming
this-
back in some cities, major housing
Right.
shortages, but I think, again, I think what we more likely will see here is efficiency apartments rather than the SRO.
It's interesting that a full kitchen includes sink, refrigerator, and a stove, range top, or oven.
Or
There
microwave.
could just be an oven, nothing to cook on top of.
Okay, we'll do that.
I think if we changed it to a range or stove and oven, cooktop and oven.
No, we could just say oven. I mean, that kind of sums it up.
Well,
Range.
although in college dorms, it was just a cooktop.
Yeah.
Oh, so
Didn't
is it,
have the
oh,
oven.
yeah, the,
Yeah,
yeah, the warmer.
If
The
we're bringing
warmer.
up college dorms, I do feel a need when there's several UMass alums, including myself. I twice lived in a building of 22 floors with 3 kitchens,
Wow.
so
Microwave.
life finds a way to cook.
now with the new modern stuff, now I guess we could just say, you know, I mean, people pretty much know it's an oven, range top, stove top, whatever. We just say oven, refrigerator, a sink,
And
maybe a
cooktop.
dishwasher. Hey, yeah, put that in.
Cooktop.
Cooktop.
Dishwasher.
I think it's
I think
important to
if
have
we
cooktop
change
and ovens
stove,
spelled out.
Yeah.
If it's, we take out stove, we take
Cooktop
out
is
range
good.
top, and we say oven and cooktop. And they can be combined or they can be separate,
Okay.
but I think that makes sense.
No dishwasher. Some of them have dishwashers.
I like the idea of including the encouragement,
Hand wash.
even if not a requirement, that there be a kitchen per floor. I think that makes sense. We can't, you know, if we're not going to require it, I think at least making the suggestion is nice.
Yeah, I mean, down the road, there could be that possibility.
Could we give them a 13th bonus room if they have a second kitchen?
Throw it in there. I would.
No, but there's no limit on rooms, right? So it's just a joke.
12, isn't it?
No.
12?
No, not
Yeah,
for
it
an
was 12,
SRO.
wasn't it?
No,
No.
that was
No, that's,
Limitless for an SRO?
Yes.
Ooh.
Well, and minimally
Wow.
limitless too.
Huh.
There could be a one-room SRO, one SRO building, right?
no, because that would be a rental. Could you? Could you have a
Right.
one-room SRO? No, because.
Any
It says
building
one
containing
room. Why not?
rooms
All right, we're
rented
getting
as
silly.
living quarters.
Yeah.
Trouble there.
So we're suggesting the, for the kitchen, just wording that they're encouraged to have one per room?
So,
I mean, one per
that's
floor?
recommended.
Got no regulatory teeth.
No, I know.
Well, we could call it a warmer, I mean, that's.
But, and what would the DRB oversee with this, just site plan review?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that,
Well, I don't know if it's, I don't know where it's conditional or,
oh, right,
It might be
it depends on where it's
conditional
conditional or not.
Ah,
And then J,
yeah.
I would suggest that we drop that to 150 square feet.
Maybe we talked about that earlier, because I think the previous chat,
Mhm.
550.
That makes sense. And then I like it being 2 people. I personally think that the bike and car parking is probably a little bit slim, considering that we could have lots and lots and lots of people living in this building if they're doubled up in rooms. But I think we want less parking and more bikes, and some people may or may not have the physical capacity to use either, so let's move along.
So single room occupancy unit may be occupied by more than 2 people.
No single.
No
Yeah,
single,
single.
okay. Gotcha.
Those darn operative words, right? Just fast.
God, I don't know how you get it. It's
Um,
out of there now.
Are we,
Love it.
oh, and then for the rooming house, any, let's just take these together. I think we're not
Yeah.
gonna do
Yeah, I
much with
think
rooming
we-
house. Any, questions or suggested changes to those
I
two
think
changes to the
Sarah's
rooming house?
suggestion that we change it to people here too.
Oh, right.
People,
No more than 2 people may be housed in each room.
kids are people too.
There. If it's clear to everyone, we could, I'll move that we accept these changes to SRO and rooming house, but with the additional changes that have been mentioned.
I was gonna ask
And-
a question.
And ask that we have it, that there be a review to ensure that it's compliant with higher level regulations as well.
Mhm.
Yeah, regarding household limits.
Sorry,
No,
I've interrupted you.
no, I was just saying, the F one,
Oh,
meals not be provided to the general public?
It assumes that some rooming and boarding houses have, the person that owns it is providing meals. Again, it feels a little dated to me.
I wanna sign up for this.
like a boarding
I know,
house
can I live
means
there
that you
too?
provide board.
I
But a
think my
rooming
kids
house
live in a
doesn't
boarding
necessarily
house.
provide board, But there's boarding houses, and they provide, like,
They're not
my
adults.
grandfather lived in one.
Yeah, they're people.
In the 80s.
So they're soon
They're
to be
Owners
boarding
cook the
house.
Okay.
meals.
Yeah, I remember back in the
Gonna start
30s.
But it's just putting a limit
That's
on
violation.
That's what they did, yeah. they
But it's
can't-
just saying
Gotta
that,
fix
you know,
that.
Meals must
they
not
can't
be
provide
provided.
meals to the public for, you know, for money.
They're not paying, so we gotta start
Okay.
charging.
So if it's,
Because then that would start
Generosity.
blurring the line with like a restaurant, and we don't wanna
Yeah.
do that for moving.
No, we have stuff for bed and breakfasts and inns that do allow
Right,
the
yeah,
public,
that's
well, inns allow the public.
so like back in the 30s, I was watching this show on third class, if I was saying anything. And these are the way they were back then. A lot of the people, like nurses or people traveling, used to come and have how the people prepared the meal.
Exactly,
So,
yeah.
Yeah, we were saying in the office, it seems like there's one of these going on in every like Christmas movie from the Hallmark Channel.
Exactly.
A barn,
Yeah.
Yeah.
bed in it.
So I'll,
So Tom, you made the
I
motion.
made the motion.
I second
yeah,
And a
that.
second.
yeah, then we're
We'll
gonna-
see it again at a public hearing. I know
Yes.
maybe all the things we talked about were a little hazy, but if nothing's jumping out at people, then I hope we can just vote on it right now.
Sure.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
All five of us. I see Sarah's hand up.
And like you said, this could be really good.
It will be.
Can you pull up this one? It might be in the other document. So now we're gonna talk about proposed language to be inserted in all zoning districts. Let's see, Steve's gonna try to pull it up. So, Tom, I think this is one that you had suggested. So,
This is in the same.
yeah, I think
previous
it's in that
document,
one. Yeah, here you go.
okay. Still have to share that, my apologies.
It was there. Okay. So, Tom, I think this was you, but if not.
Maybe, I don't know.
So this
I did
is
like it.
dimensional standards. So each district is, in the land use regulations is like section 220 something. And then C is dimensional standards. It's just a little preface before you see the table of the dimensional standards. And so the language would be the following standards apply to all development in this district in accordance with whatever the section is. And the new language is unless a waiver or variance is granted in accordance with section 432. So it just lets people know that there's another avenue than those hard and fast setback numbers or even lot coverage or that kind of thing. So it's that unless a waiver or variance is granted in accordance with section 432, that's the new section. It just maybe makes the document a little bit more readable.
Mhm.
I'm a big fan.
Great. Any thoughts on that? Or, I mean, any issues? Okay. But now back to considering something about the neighborhood center?
Yeah. I think this was something Brian sent us. He wanted a new purpose statement.
What's the difference?
Want me to try to pull up the
It's right there.
split screen so you can see the original?
Sorry about this one. Sorry, I'm not prepared on this one.
I noticed that it removes from the current purpose statement, well, it just says at the end, in accordance with the Brattleboro town plan, but the current reg purpose says in accordance with the town plan, as well as the Putney Road Master Plan, the gateway strategy for the Canal Street Commercial District.
Okay, yeah, so it does, so those, it does remove those were kind of brought into the regulations when we were doing them, not the Putney Road Master Plan, because that one was a little different, but some of the ideas from it came into the regulations and also into the town plan, so we didn't see a need for those to be referenced anymore. And the other thing it does is it captures the Route 9 area near Sunset Lake Road. So actually, I don't think Brian wrote this. I think I did several months ago to kind of clean that up because we were dealing with a neighborhood center change. So everything else is the same. It just adds the West Brattleboro area and removes reference to those previous plans, which were taken into account when we did the town plan anyway.
Yeah. Well, at the time of the public hearing, this will actually be formatted with the strikeouts or the underlines of new wording, so that it'll be clearer then, but certainly, commissioners, if you're not clear on it, speak up.
So any deletions will be on that page?
I'm sorry?
Any deletions, I guess you're saying, that's gonna be?
I'm just
Yeah,
saying,
I'll do a strikeout version of it.
Okay.
I will say, this is minor,
yeah.
in my mind.
Yeah, me too. If these two, everything on the screen share right there, those two sections, change of wording is all right with people and no more discussion, then I'll move that we approve those changes for a future public hearing. Todd seconds. All in favor?
Aye.
Please raise. Gary, Sarah, Todd, and I. Okay, Lena stepped out, but no need to hold up for this.
Do you want to do some accessory?
What's the next one? Accessory structures?
Yeah.
Oh, there's 226D as well. Accessory, the frontage standards.
226D, where's that?
That should be the RN.
Oh, the frontage. Oh, we could do 226D now if you want, or, that one's a pretty quick
Just
one.
wrap it up.
Yeah, okay. Sorry, this is one that Brian passed along. So this one would allow, so currently, you can't have any additional parking in the minimum front yard setback. And
This is for RN, right?
This is in the residential neighborhood area, yeah. And this is particularly a problem for corner lots when they're trying to add more units. So he was looking for the DRB to have a little leeway to approve either the retention of parking in the front setback or a little bit of addition where it might be the only place that you can get parking to add additional units. So like I said, there's a lot of corner lots that this applies to. There's area for them to have another house or maybe some more residential units, but they can't meet the standard where you can't have any more parking in the front yard or that you have to remove it in the front yard setback. So just, and the idea is that it would be pervious pavement, so it's not kind of creating more runoff. You know, you can have it, but it's gonna have to handle that, so. A little flexibility to allow more units.
Thoughts, commissioners? Makes sense to you, Todd? Does to me as well.
Yeah,
Sarah nodded.
I definitely agree.
Okay, motion?
Motion. Sorry, I still think I was back. I thought I was back in town.
I was requesting a motion.
Call the question, please.
I move to approve the changes to 226D as presented.
Second.
Gary seconds. Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
All
Okay,
right, Sarah
thank you.
stands up too, all four of us.
Point of order.
Accessory structures now?
I'm missing something. Oh, this is the one you just did.
Please feel free to ignore everything after page 2. It's just extra fun stuff for those of you that like reading.
Thank you for doing it.
Oh, sure. So I wanted to just make sure that we had at least statewide, broader understanding of what the sort of practice was, just in case that what Tom had brought in the adjacent communities was maybe more of a rural trend than it was anything broader than that, but it actually appeared to be the case that there is just sort of a free-for-all with not really any wide-ranging trends. I would say it tends to be slightly less common in a very non-scientific sense in the suburban or more urban areas of the state that there are full exemptions below a certain size, but it is still quite common to have certain exemptions. And in practice, at the moment, we have, without giving a specific amount of feet, we tend to be able to exempt things that are actually physically portable and have that be sort of the demarcation between real property and personal property that wouldn't need to have a zoning permit. So in trying to.
But that's not
bridge-
stated in the regs, right? It's just something.
Right.
That's just-
Yeah, not
It's
explicitly.
your own
so.
policy.
Yeah, there is language that refers to what a minimum threshold for something to be a structure is in general, so things that don't meet that, that might be in the special flood hazard overlay, so I'm not sure the applicability of that definition to the rest of the regs, but it's something to do with the number of walls plus covering, where a farmer's market stand does not count as a, I know that off the top of my head, but.
Woodsheds is something, so like 3 sides and a cover, like
Right.
something like a woodshed, we consider that a structure.
Okay, so yeah, two walls and a cover
There you go.
is not a structure. But in any event, we tried to sort of harmonize the existing status quo where it was possible to maybe not explicitly, but in practice, allow for that exemption for small movable things. I think we gave a little bit more than that in making it sort of an 8-foot cube. But didn't go all the way up to the 200 square feet that we see in some communities, because it seems like that, it's not that many permits that would actually impact over the last 5 years, but it's a small but non-zero amount of permit income, and it's, I think this, in our view, sort of split the difference, but it's certainly open to discussion.
Well, when we talked about this several or a few months ago, I feel like we kind of then landed on 100 square feet. And I forgot what we landed on for the height. Maybe it was 15 feet, and seeing 8 now, I think, oh, maybe 15's a little too high, but 8 seems too low to me. I think, just a simple.
4s and be able to put a sheet of plywood inside the thing if you needed to store.
Yeah, and a
some
simple shed that has a
materials.
little gable.
Even your garden tools would be hard to fit in something
Yeah.
that has an 8-foot tall.
Yeah, say 12 feet is the company, considers a gable roofed tiny little structure.
And is this
So-
list of the 24 total permits, is that in 2018, there was a structure of 31 square feet? Am I reading that properly, or those?
Those are the
Permit numbers?
numbers of permits. Should have made that clear. So, yeah, 2018 seems like a odd outlier, but in general, yeah, it's about 5 a year.
Okay, so this is the permit number?
Yeah.
For which it was
Yeah.
state, so 30, permit number 31 and 35 and 38 and 39 and 41, and, okay.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Other thoughts about the, that square footage and the height that I brought up? Thought I saw.
Yeah, I have to agree with that, 8 foot, it should be 12 at least. Like you said, for anything you want to store in there, that's
Mhm.
over that, like most of them are now. Is that a requirement we can amend, or?
Oh, absolutely, yeah, yeah, this is up for us to decide. Yeah, in the 100 feet, a few months ago, we talked about how that would kind of align nicely with the town's policy about what they assess and what they don't.
Well, let me
It's
just
not actually a
clarify.
policy.
It
I
isn't
think
a
we should-
policy,
we should make
and
it clear.
they do reserve, I mean, it's kind of the unwritten, again, generally, something 100 square feet or less doesn't have a lot of value, but,
No.
people are doing lots of different things, and so they can assess it if they find that it's valuable. And then the only other thing I'd say is, it's a little bit more complicated for us to administer when there is this exemption. Because, from our perspective in the department, we prefer to just be permitting everything, because it's simpler and, things aren't gonna slip through the cracks. That way, 100 square foot, is a common shed. We're used to issuing those permits, and we do it quickly.
It's also worth noting that without requiring a permit, there could be an increased amount of legal liability on the owner as well as potential difficulties with transfer of title. If permits are lacking for that particular thing, if they cease to exist as something that we issue, that might be difficult to convince a title research professional of. These are kind of edge cases, but it still certainly does occur.
So Deacon, what about insurance-wise, if you want to insure that?
That could also complicate
Yeah.
things in a way that we wouldn't be able to advise on.
Right.
As well as E911 addressing, it could potentially complicate that.
Because the E911 like registry wouldn't have a record of certain structures? And
Quite possibly, yeah. If someone hadn't come to tell yours truly that that thing exists and we don't have a permit required for that, then it could be the case that there's human occupancy of an outbuilding that we have no knowledge of. So it wouldn't get a unique identification.
Well, whether we settle on 64 or 100 or I hope we don't strike this whole exemption. I think, a few months ago when I brought it up, some of my rationale was just, a lot of communities have this, and it seems kind of, I don't know if picayune is the right word, but to just, to require a permit and oversight for every, seemingly for every structure. I'm just hearing now that you guys say that there's a definition of what a structure is. Are you saying that's in statute or something? I don't see that in the regs. I mean, I see the definition of structure, but it doesn't seem to say like a little woodshed or something isn't allowed, so maybe that could be clarified as well. But I think it's reasonable to have small structures, that aren't lived in and business isn't being done in, just to not need, to just give people that sort of, freedom to just put something simple up, simply. But what are people's thoughts on 64 that the staff's proposing versus, say, 100?
I like 100.
Yeah, me too.
100 too.
It seems a lot of our nearby communities are using 100 as well.
So 100 with the 12-foot?
Yeah.
Looks like some places we're doing 12, some are doing 15, some are doing 10. I think 12 seems like a reasonable, rational height for the sake of building.
And then I wanted to bring up towards the end of that draft language, where are my notes here? What did I write? When it just seems like extra wording, the part about the flood hazard overlay district, because I think, because section 111, that talks about all the exemptions, like mailboxes and home occupations and other things, says, already in the preface of 111, it says, except in the flood hazard overlay. So we don't need to put that in each little exemption either, unless we want to be ultra clear about it.
I think we do here.
Oh,
I think we don't want to be in a situation like we've been in before where somebody puts one down and we're like,
oh, okay.
you need a special permit for that. So I would just,
Yeah, I don't think it changes anything materially. I just thought, to me, it seemed like, doubling up with words, but it's fine.
I think it's important for
Okay.
this one
All right.
that it stay.
I hear you.
Because if they're not reading the preface, then.
Right.
I think it could also make sense to apply setbacks to this. I noticed some of the other communities do, and that's something I'm familiar with in other places I've been.
It does say in the draft language that that the structure should be fully compliant with all applicable base zoning district or accessory structure dimensional standards.
Got it, thank you, I did miss that.
So at least in the way that I drafted this, it was intended to require a permit if you would need to get a dimensional waiver, but not if you didn't. I don't know if that reads clearly or if it is
I mean, we
confusing.
might want to, clean it up a little bit, but, so the intent is it would comply with the
And local waivers, yeah, okay.
But then, like, well, kind of like my question about the flood hazard overlay district, historic resource overlay district is in there as something that would, if the detached accessory structure, small structure is going to be placed there, then it wouldn't be eligible for this exemption. But the historic resource overlay district itself seems to not care about detached accessory structures that are under 200 square feet and under 15 square feet. Like in that overlay district, that's one of the things that it says, if you put an accessory structure that's under 200 square feet footprint and under 15-foot height, then you don't have to, then you don't need historic resource overlay review. So I don't see why.
Yeah, I think the intention was to still have the permit by the administrative officer, but not necessarily require the DRC to review, just for the sake of being able to flag something for whether or not it actually needed a review.
But if we're already settling on that, we feel like under 100 square foot, under 12-foot height, doesn't need review for the sake of E911 and title and insurance and all these other things, then why add the added restriction for HRO districts?
Because if you throw it on a character defining facade, it could ruin the.
Yeah,
but
it's certainly out of the, it's contrary to the statement of what the purpose is for that particular section. But, I mean, there is always a balancing of priorities. I would say, if anything, we should consider striking the exemption within the HRO and just allow for the exemption from permitting of from permit fees, I suppose, for the small units, but still allow for review to be able to catch accessory structures in the HRO, so as not to weaken the purpose of that. But maybe staff could take a look at a way to harmonize that if there's time. I think we had mostly walled ourselves off from looking at section 252, and so maybe that created a
yeah, I feel
warp in it.
like it does.
The freestanding language.
Right, because that's.
Yeah, I think that given 8, I think it should probably come out of this.
Okay.
You agree?
Yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because.
Yeah, given that it says freestanding, I think it's less likely to be anything that they'd be seriously concerned about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, just to make sure I'm understanding that, if somebody is in the flood hazard overlay, or if the structure that they have created or are intending to create doesn't match everything listed here, plus the base zoning, then it would still need to be permitted. Okay.
So we've proposed to take the draft language and up the 64 to 100,
Yep.
up the 8-foot height to 12 feet,
Right.
and to strike the historic resource overlay district. Exemption to the exemption. Or reversal of the exemption, one might say. If there's nothing else, well, I could get a second for that.
Okay.
Thank you, Linda. If there's no comments or further discussion on that, then all those in favor?
Aye.
That's all 5 of us. Great. Do we have any other proposed language?
We do. We have 2 more.
Oh.
We have the zoning district height, which we had talked about at the last meeting. And we came away, so at the end of the last meeting, there was some conversation about the rural districts and should that be increased to, was it 48 feet? Well, there's a couple things going on here. We had said we'd go back and look at all the heights. And then we've also, the planning commission made the decision at the last meeting that we wanted to measure height in feet. We have a little trepidation about that and feel that stories kind of more accurately goes with building form, where height gets to kind of building morphology. So if you're looking at measuring the height, you're not necessarily catching the type of roof that is on it. So all of a sudden, structures have to be shorter to hit the pitch of a roof under our regulations. But if we go with stories, then you can have those pitched roofs or other things. So we were kind of thinking we'd like to stick with stories. We're okay using a combination of height and story, and then with the story definition, we just go with the same one that's being used for missing middle housing, which is, I think, a 7-foot height. So we get rid of multiple definitions of story. And what we also brought to you is a proposal where in most districts we allow an increase in the height by a story. So except within the urban center and the village center, those, because they're kind of two historic areas, those heights would remain at 6 stories and 4 stories, but the service center, neighborhood center, mixed use district, they could all be bumped up to 5 stories. Residential neighborhood would stay at 3 stories, and then we could continue to measure 35-foot height in the rural areas, because we didn't feel like really bumping those up anymore because of kind of this transect idea. And then in addition to that, they don't have the same municipal water system that can be used for firefighting. So just about it, 36 feet, 35 feet is still pretty high. Not sure it necessarily needs to go up more. So the proposal here is to kind of bump it up in places. There is still the waiver possibility to add another floor on top of these. One of the proposals in the Senate on omnibus housing would actually, for certain developments, allow for another story to whatever the local regulations say. So, it adds to what extent a developer might make use of this to create some additional housing. We think it allows for a little bit more growth to bump it up.
Right.
But again, we'd like to go back to the stories, particularly for the developed districts, because it kind of relates more to the form.
And if it helps context-wise, some economic research I have done for background shows that at least in the urban areas of the U.S. that were surveyed for this, the difference between 4 stories and 5 stories can be significant and often does result in a developer choosing to develop 5 stories if allowed to, as compared to the difference between 3 stories and 4 stories. That tends to be a fairly major economy of scale that they do often choose to develop out. So there's good reason to believe that moving from 4 to 5 isn't just an arbitrary thing, that it actually does likely bear fruit housing-wise. Whereas 6 stories is actually not often taken up, but 7 often is, although we haven't proposed that here per se.
Sorry, to make sure I'm understanding that, you're saying that for a developer, the jump from 3 to 4 is often kind of cost prohibitive, so they're more likely to do 3.
Mm-hmm.
But if 4 is allowed and 5 is allowed, they're more likely to go for 5. That jump just doesn't seem to be as big, the incremental.
Yeah, I think if you were keeping this, the floor plate the same, that would be the case, that they would rather see 5 than 3. Again, at least in the urban context that we're looked at, but I don't think that we would be too different from those given our shortage of housing. It may well be the case that in our districts that allow for larger floor plates, that they would rather do 3 stories or 2 stories of a wider building. But they may also want to do 5 floors of a large footprint.
Yeah, I think probably the difference there too, so the big thing is after 3 floors, at 4 floors you need an elevator
Mhm.
under code, and so maybe getting the 5th story makes it a little bit more
Sure.
Challenging.
easier, yeah.
And something kicks in at the 6th floor that makes it cost prohibitive, whereas the 7th gets that back, I guess. But again, we haven't brought 7 at this juncture.
Thoughts on the proposed changes to the max height strategy?
I guess I just got a little lost in whether, it sounds like the recommendation here is still to go with 3 for the RN because of it being more conducive to what's already there and expecting that the taller buildings wouldn't be in that area anyway necessarily.
Yeah.
Okay.
And you could get a 4th story,
With the
you
waiver.
could get a waiver and get a 4th story, so it is possible to go higher there.
I'm comfortable with this as is then. I was one of the people advocating for the height rather than stories, but what you've explained makes a lot of sense to me, so I feel comfortable moving forward with this.
Given that we're gonna have 2 RNs, it might be worth considering if there should be a distinction between those 2. I think we've left that sort of up in the air, but they could also just be the same part of the transept.
I move that we accept the height dimensional standards as proposed in this table.
And I will second that.
Okay, any further discussion? No? All those in favor?
Aye.
That's all 5 of us. Okay, gosh, I really had high hopes for this meeting, getting through everything, but it's 7:56, so we should decide.
What's the last one?
With one more.
Yeah, let's do this
Okay.
one more,
We can do, we'll have to,
but we won't even get to the,
for anything past 8.
This might be quick.
Elevator
let's just see
pitch.
if we can get through this.
Power
Yeah,
through
what is it? Let's
That's
touch
actually
that.
So this,
Here's the thing, I didn't see this one at all.
This
though.
might
Came in today.
this might feel
Oh.
like it's come out of nowhere, but we did actually discuss this in May, June, July, September, November, and January. And somehow never took action any of those times. So I noticed in skimming over what we've got so far the other day that it seemed like we had neglected to include changes to the attached housing section that would actually allow for lot subdivisions specific to those type of buildings that would actually allow for fee simple lots that aren't footprint lots, which is something that's enabled in section 444 and what Brandy brought for us. But that specifically is literally underneath your house and no more. Whereas this is allowing for lots that are exempted from the other base standards that would be geometrically just not workable for a house that has 2 walls shared with neighboring, 1 or 2 walls shared with neighboring homes. So it's essentially bringing the minimum frontage and the minimum lot size down to meet the dimensional standards that we apply to this form and making that the basis for subdividing a lot specifically to that. We've also bumped up the consecutive number of feet that you can have a row of these houses by 40, just to bring it up to a, I think, roughly 20 units in a row. We don't expect that to be actually proposed. We think that the natural topography and the parcels as they are, as well as economic reality and other regulations that we have would probably make for blocks that are much shorter than that, but we set it at 400 just in case.
Yeah, so this isn't in strike through, but 2A was just a clarification, just to make it more clear that you can subdivide these and how you're gonna handle the setbacks of it. And then 5A and B have been tweaked just a little bit, clarifying that, where garages are, as long as they're attached to the dwelling unit. Because you could have a bay of garages, and we talked about this a couple of years ago too. You could have a bay of garages that are separate, not attached to the house. And like Steve said, that, you know, contiguous group of dwellings cannot exceed 400 feet. That's essentially like the length of the block between High Street and Elliott Street. So after that, you'd have to have a new block of buildings. Most of the current condo developments in Brattleboro are shorter than that. They're, you know, 250 or less in feet. So it's generous.
We don't expect it to probably ever be taken up, but maybe there's good reason to see one. But primarily, in case I wasn't clear in my elevator pitch for this, it's changed the minimum lot size that these are subject to from being, it was 4,000 regardless of its district, which actually was quite restrictive in the urban center where the minimum is 2,000. And it brings that down from the 3,600 that we had in our language for this version. That would have created a very strange lot division when the dimensions of an end unit are not the same as the dimensions of a mid-block unit. So this allows it to be more contextual, and it just says that any applicable setbacks, be that front, side, or rear, need to actually be satisfied either by waiver or as per the base dimensions. And the minimum lot size is simply whatever that number is plus the size of the unit.
And this is only going to apply outside of the missing middle, you know, this is
I
separate.
don't actually have any objections to this, but I think because this is our first introduction to it, we should save this and have it be one of the items on the agenda for the next time.
I was gonna agree with that. There was something on there, but I didn't wanna, I'll just call it a question.
Yeah. No, I mean, everything I heard, to the extent that I could follow it, thinking of it for the first time, seemed reasonable to me, but yeah, it's hard without having
Let's
review
sleep on it for a
time.
moment.
Yeah. I have some visuals. Would it help if I brought them next time?
If you wanna hold on to mine, I already got.
If you have them, yeah. One thing that's a little tough is that I thought, I was hoping and thought that we would get through all the changes and next time we'd be talking about public hearing, but if we still have this to go over and the Winston Prouty request for, you know, we have set to make their back half of their acreage, from institutional to rural residential, that in their letter, they're requesting that we make it mixed use. I won't say more, because we just can't get into it now, unless we vote to go longer.
I mean, do we do a site survey up there, just look at it to see, just to get a visualization of
You
where?
can,
Well,
you
good,
can go
sure.
up there, we could do that.
I would love to just see before I.
But, so if we don't, well, we're not gonna decide on this right now, because we just agreed that we need to see the strike-throughs and stuff, so I guess we need to have another meeting.
Do we need to call a meeting before?
Well, we don't have any public hearings scheduled.
Okay.
Sue and I were thinking, both of them in May, right? 2 public hearings in May.
Oh, I think we'd be looking at the end of May anyway.
The end of May,
So
yeah.
I think at the first May meeting, we could wrap this up.
Oh,
okay.
We could vote on a bylaw that we're gonna bring
Okay,
to public
great.
hearing. You could approve the report that we need to write, that the planning commission needs to file. And then we could set the public hearings, like maybe one could be late in May and one could be at the June meeting or something like that.
Yeah.
Um,
So do we
We
need
could
to
do
vote
something like that.
this particular thing for the next, or we just table it for the next?
I think we're tabling it, because we didn't feel so confident, you know, or prepared for it. But yeah, Sue just quickly went through on our next, not that I'm trying to get through the remaining agenda items, but the bylaw modernization next steps, you just touched on that a little bit. But do you want any feedback now or in early May about the commission's desired public outreach? You just spoke to the
Honestly,
adoption
I'm
schedule.
okay with May. I'm
Yeah.
on vacation kind of for a week and a half at the end of this month, so my
Okay.
time is a little cramped
Okay.
this month, so I'm okay doing it in May.
Okay.
Can we add that with, excuse me, Winston Prouty also do a site visit just to see like in May, before we,
I'll go with you sometime, Gary.
yeah, I mean,
We'll walk
we could
around.
be our scout leader.
I'm curious to remember them.
Oh,
Yeah, I mean, we haven't done it in a while, I mean, I'd like to see.
oh, if there's four of us, though, we can't discuss
We can
business.
coordinate.
Oh, we can't? I don't have to do it all.
I mean, if you want something more formal, I'm sure that we could get Winston Prouty to
Oh,
give you a half an hour conversation about what their plans are and then go up, walk around.
Love to. I would like to have
We
that.
could do that before the May meeting.
Let's do
yeah, you wanna do a doodle poll?
Sure.
See when we all can align? I mean, I don't know if we necessarily need a tour from someone who wasn't Prouty, but that could be nice as well, so include them on the poll if you think that'd be.
And that'd be good for like the new members to see, I don't know, Lena, you ever did our leader here, Stephen,
Yeah.
he took us out.
Yeah, he do those.
Scout leader, took us places.
We did
We were good.
neighborhood character surveys of a
It
couple.
was fun, actually, it was great, and we really, you learn a lot more visually, versus looking at, you know, pictograms and stuff like this. Now you have a better purview, which I think would be great. Probably, I think it should be warm by May.
It's warm today.
Yeah, gorgeous.
One can hope.
So we got through all the proposed changes except for the attached housing, which we'll see next time, and the zoning at Winston Prouty, which we'll have a warrant site survey for and talk about in May. And then the looking ahead, which is just kind of brainstorming or, you know, sharing, strategizing what we want to prioritize after these public hearings. We'll put that off to May as well.
I guess Sarah, that's good for you too, Sarah, but I just want to make sure.
Good for me.
I know you
Thank
took
Great.
a little time off, we don't want to exert you.
But I'll move,
I probably won't be at the May meeting.
oh, okay.
Well, I got a red wagon if I gotta pull you. So be it. Or my little camera on top of my hat or something.
I have to do the public comment.
Say.
Period. Yeah, but there are none, no members of the public, so can close that agenda item. We didn't get to everything, so I can't adjourn the meeting. I need a motion and a vote, I believe.
Motion to adjourn the meeting.
Okay, second.
I second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
It's all five of us. Okay. No one wanted to stay longer?
City fun game to watch tonight.
I think we had enough Saturday, you know?
Yep.
I'm still recuperating from that big.